Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in live to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm Andy Leach, the Senior Director of Museum and Archival Collections for the Rock Hall, and I am thrilled to be hosting tonight's event featuring the great Chris Hillman of the Byrds, who is a 1991 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and also special guest and good friend of Chris Hillman, country legend Marty Stuart is going to be joining us. I'm going to talk with Chris about his fantastic new book, which is called Time Between, My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond. And we'll hear some music. We're going to see some photos from the book. And then Marty will join us a little later in the conversation, and we should have time for some questions from viewers for Chris. So if you're watching, please submit your questions in the comments. So before we get started, I want to mention just a few things. Here in Cleveland, our museum is open every day. So please go to rockhall.com to get more information about that and to get your tickets. We have a bunch of great exhibits here. The most recent exhibit here is called The Biggest Show on Turf, 55 years of halftime shows. And for those who don't know, this year's NFL draft was hosted right here in Cleveland. And to help celebrate that, we put together this great new exhibit that honors the history of Super Bowl halftime shows and all the legendary musicians that have performed at those shows with artifacts from those performances. And that'll be here all the way through January of next year. So come and check it out. We also want to urge you to become a member of the Rock Hall. So much of what we do here is made possible through the generous support of our members. If you don't already have a Rock Hall membership, please consider joining us as a member and check out rockhall.com for more info on that as well. We also encourage you to check out our online store where we have a great selection of merchandise, including right now a limited number of signed copies of Chris's new book, Time Between. So make sure to go there at rockhall.com and get one of those. And finally, I want you to know that you'll be able to hear this interview sometime in the coming weeks on the SiriusXM platform. And we want to thank our partners at SiriusXM for the great work that they do with us, as always. And now, without further delay, I will introduce Chris Hillman. Chris was a founding member of the Byrds, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Manassas, the Souther Hillman Furay Band, McGuinn Clark Hillman, the Desert Rose Band, and even more bands beyond that. He's had a distinguished solo career throughout all of that as well. As I'm sure you all know, the Byrds essentially invented folk rock, starting with their first single and album, Mr. Tambourine Man, in 1965. And within just a few years from then, their music directly launched country rock too, particularly with their Sweetheart of the Rodeo album in 1968. 50 years after that album, in 2018, the 50th anniversary of that album was celebrated with a special tour featuring Chris, fellow Byrds co-founder Roger McGuinn, and they were joined by country legends Marty Stuart and his fabulous superlatives. So we're going to hear about that tonight, I'm sure. Chris's memoir, Time Between, My Life as a Bird, Burrito Brother, and Beyond, was published by BMG in BMG Books in November 2020, which everyone should read, I should say. And as Dwight Yoakam eloquently points out in the foreword of Chris's book, a strong argument can be made that Chris was actually the very soul of the Byrds, always pushing himself and those around him in the band to see the possibilities of not just what their music was, but what their music could become. He's a true musical pioneer. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of the Byrds in 1991, and I could not be more thrilled to have him join us from his home in California. So let's bring him on and welcome the legendary Chris Hillman.
Thank you, Andy.
Anytime. Thanks.
Very kind introduction, Andy. Thank you so much.
Much deserved. Much deserved. Well, thanks so much for being here. As you know already, I loved reading the new book, and it's a very honest book. You're a very honest storyteller, and you don't mince words about necessarily. You don't mince words about things you don't like, but you don't dwell on the negative either. It's just the truth. Mm-hmm. It's very honest, very refreshing. So I'm glad you wrote it. Well, there's so much to talk about, and I just guess I would want to just dig right into it. So you start from the beginning as a kid in the late 40s, early 50s, growing up. You grew up in Rancho Santa Fe, California.
Correct.
Starting around the age of 2, I think. And It sounds like it was a really pretty idyllic environment to grow up in, right?
It was. I always say post-World War II, Andy. Post-World War II, America was pretty fantastic. Our parents had gone through, as youngsters, they'd gone through the Depression, and then World War II, of course. And it was such a great time to grow up because everybody had settled down and everybody was rebuilding. Of course, we didn't get hit too hard over here in America, but it was a great time to grow up. It was very much. I grew up very much like little Leave It to Beaver or Ricky Nelson's family. I mean, it was just so middle class California. It was wonderful.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Hollywood actors lived there in Rancho Santa Fe, right?
They did. Yeah, they would. It was a wonderful place for them to go and cool out. And there was a couple, Victor Mature and Robert Keith. Robert Keith was a character actor. I always would play a police lieutenant, but the best thing he did, I think, was in Marlon Brando's The Wild Ones, and he was the small town sheriff. And he's getting bullied around by Marlon Brando and his bike gang, and so anyway, he lived up the road from us. Yeah,
I remember that from the book. Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
No, they kept to themselves. Both. I mean, Victor Mature was a lovely guy. I mean, he loved kids, and he was always open to the kids in town. And he became really good friends with my dad. And he was so funny. I mean, he said, if you think I'm an actor, go look at one of my movies. And he had a great take on himself. So, that was pretty interesting. Yeah. Yeah,
nice. And then there was that included among those Hollywood actors, there was someone who you later immortalized in a song, a very memorable song, right? John Robertson.
John Robertson, and I had no idea of his background when I was all of 7 years old. And there's a nice picture of John. He always looked like that, Andy. He'd have a beautiful suit on and jodhpurs and the boots, and his wife, Jo. Now, his wife was an actress, as I found out later, as John Robertson was a screenwriter, a director, and a producer, and an actor in the 20s. So their highlight time was the 20s. The last movie John Robertson did was a talking picture with Shirley Temple, and I think he retired. But my only time with him was as a young guy he was just such a sweet guy. He couldn't drive a car in reverse. So he actually, when he'd ride his horse into town to the post office, and he'd tie his horse up and get the mail. Never drove a car, but he was a lovely guy. I mean, he encouraged the kids with horses and stuff. He got that whole going. So.
Yeah, and you revisited that song because it originally ended up on the notorious Byrd Brothers album.
Correct.
In 67, but you revisited it on Biding My Time, which we'll talk about later. But that's a nice kind of way to revisit the song and kind of fills out some of the story, actually, right?
Well, yeah, I added to what John's life was like. I mean, it lends itself to being a great short story. What he did in his life and all of that, and it's came out good. So. We'll
and I love the new old John Robertson. It's a really nice, nice.
I mean, all I did, Andy, was I added a chorus to it, and in his early days in Hollywood and this and that, and this is material that I wasn't aware of until maybe 10, 20 years ago when I was doing some research, or 7 years ago, I should say. That's the time I put it in the book. Yeah.
Research for the book, I see. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, in the book, you talk about how. A few years later, you start discovering music, and in junior high, I think, and you're buying all kinds of the greatest rock and roll records of that era. But then a little later, sometime around 1959 or so, you discovered bluegrass, right? And that's sort of seems like that's what really changed everything for you.
It's interesting because here I was, and most people my age, we were right there when rock and roll exploded. 1955, 1956. And as I say in the book, we had this wonderful teacher, Mrs. Ross, Ellen Ross, and she actually let us bring records in 1956 and play them on a record player and dance at the end of the school day.
Elvis records, things like that. Yeah,
Elvis, Little Richard, stuff like that. Her daughter was on Happy Days, was the mother on Happy Days. That was, and so Ellen Ross is Marion Ross. Exactly. Good. Thank you, Andy. So that was her daughter, and she was great. She taught my brother, and she taught me, and she was a wonderful teacher. But anyway, so here we are. It's the middle. The rock and roll is exploding. Most wonderful music. I'll never forget getting up $1.79 or whatever, and going and getting Specialty Records, which is Little Richard's label. Loved all that. Did not want to learn the guitar then. I don't know why. That just did not appeal to me until along comes 1959, 1960, and folk music is coming in strong. The Kingston Trio had a hit record, Tom Dooley, on the radio. Rock and roll sort of went to sleep for a few years, with just different type of music going on there. But all of a sudden you didn't hear Little Richard or Fats Domino or Chuck Berry on the radio as much as you had.
Right.
So here comes folk music. And I always tie that into the Bohemian era, the end of the 50s, and Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, folk music and jazz on college campuses. Somehow that all worked itself in there. So once my older sister, as I write in the book, brings home these great albums, and I liked the Kingston Trio for about 5-10 minutes, and then I hear Pete Seeger, the Weavers, and Cisco Houston, and Woody Guthrie, and Leadbelly. Absolutely loved Leadbelly. Yeah. But I went from there, and then I heard not bluegrass as much as I heard the New Lost City Ramblers with Mike Seeger and playing the mandolin. And I went, wow, what is that? It was string band music.
Right.
Then I hear Flatt & Scruggs on a record live at the Newport Folk Festival. I went, oh my God. It hit a nerve in me that I don't know where that came from. It was the singing. It was the excitement of the music. It was hillbilly jazz. I think Marty Stuart will probably give you the same lines. It's hillbilly jazz, improvisational, very high energy. Mm-hmm. It's funny because the old bluegrass bands, they'd be up there serious, and when they'd get done singing, it was, they're never entertaining in the sense they'd always have a comedian up there, but because it was a lot to remember, it was interesting.
Right. I guess it's like jazz in that way too. It was
absolutely,
it was serious music, right? It was
serious music. You better, yeah.
And so you, what first drew you to the mandolin?
Oh, I think I'm listening to. There was something in that scale. I guess it was the tonality of it. And then I'm watching Mike Seeger play. He had a blonde F5 Gibson. It just sounded great to me, and I wanted to learn how to play it, and couldn't find anybody to really teach me until I write in the book about meeting Scott Hambley, who was a musicology major in Berkeley, University of California. And I went all the way up there on a train. I was 16 years old. He was wonderful. He gave me a couple of days of lessons and started me out. He said, okay, you're ready. Now go home and practice. He sort of gave me the basics, But go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask, was he filling in for Roland White and the Kentucky Colonels at that time?
That's how I met him. So we had gotten to know they originally were called the Country Boys, the White brothers, and they're the Country Boys. We had gotten to know them, and we would come up from San Diego County and watch them at the Ash Grove in L.A. And this particular time, Roland White, Clarence White's brother, was in the Army, and he was serving in Germany. And Scott was filling in on mandolin and vocals. And I just went, wow, who was that guy? Little guy up there, he's singing Footprints in the Snow.
Yeah.
So I went right up to him and said, do you give lessons? And then I went from there, yeah. I had such a passion for it. And it's so funny because the first time we got paid, I couldn't believe you could get paid. We were having so much fun. We get paid to do this too, at that time.
Well, and then, you ended up joining a band. And that, I believe your very first band was the Scottsville Squirrel Barkers, right?
Correct. One of the most fun, yeah. It was a really good group. Bernie Ledden, my old friend, who was a squirrel barker and a burrito brother.
Right.
He was an eagle. But Bernie said, when we were younger, had this great quote. He says, when we were younger, we played without fear. And I said, boy, was that ever correct. So the Squirrel Barkers, this is a great picture, Andy. Here we are playing at Disneyland, and they gave us the sport coats, ties, and hats. Okay. Why is this picture so great? It looks to me like a real band out of Kentucky, right? It doesn't look like a band from California. We're all middle-class kids, and most of us surfed and did all that, but it's like a cool picture. It's like, it's that real bluegrass look that we wanted to look like, it
looks legitimate to me. I mean, and you were the youngest, right?
I was the youngest. And that particular photo, everybody has a mustache. I couldn't grow one yet. And I had no amount of grief they gave me. I couldn't measure it. It
Well,
was, I was usually the youngest guy in most of the bands, so it was
right. I was going to say you're making up for it now. You've got a great mustache now. And a little bit later, after the Squirrel Barkers split up, you ended up joining a band called the Golden State Boys, right? Who needed a mandolin player.
Yeah. Here's a band that I would watch on television, and there's Vern Gosdin playing guitar in this picture. A very young Vern Gosdin, his brother Rex, and Don Parmalee, and there's 18-year-old Chris. I don't know how I got that job. I wasn't that good, and Don hired me, and he was as fair as can be. Don was the leader. He was playing the banjo. From day one, I got an equal cut in the money, and we went right to work. I went down. I got this offer, and I used to watch them on Cal Worthington's country music show on live on Channel 13 from Los Angeles, and we dialed it in down in San Diego County as best I could. And I loved it. I saw so much great music. Well, anyway, it ends up I get a job offer, and I end up being on that show.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I saw Buck Owens and the Buckaroos come through there, and I saw Joe and Rosalie Maphis and just everybody in the world that was out in California then. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say I love that Bakersfield stuff, but I think, we'll get to that, I think.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, around that time, it just seems like those, in Southern California especially, I guess, there were all these great bluegrass bands made up of young guys like yourself, like the Golden State Boys, Kentucky Colonels, Pine Valley Boys, the Dillards, kind of all in that same
it was a lot, but there were very few. But the Dillards came out, of course, from Salem, Missouri, and they were great. So as I was saying about bluegrass showmanship, they had it. Because when they get up there, they had an act. Rodney would go through the act. The brother and Doug was always smiling when he played the banjo. It was like Doug was having a great time, and you knew he was having a great time. So they sort of changed the game up when they came out and really put more show into their performances. Otherwise, it was the Kentucky Colonels, the Golden State Boys. Herb's band came down from Berkeley. So it was all people. Yeah, Pine Valley Boys, and then of course out in the Pasadena area, there was David Lindley and Ry Cooder was in Santa Monica. So it was a lot of guys, and they all started in that kind of music too. Ry went into blues, and sort of David sort of. But,
Sure, yeah. But a lot of the guys in those bluegrass bands, that's the early '60s. Later in the '60s, they all a lot of them become what we now think of as country rock pioneers. There's a definite direct through line from those bluegrass bands to country rock. Without it, there wouldn't be country rock. I think
I almost think you have to go to bluegrass school for a while before you embark on a career in country music. It helps immensely to go right back into the well and right into the roots of it all.
Sure. Right. Well, the next thing I remember that being really pivotal in the book is that you saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and that kind of changed everything for a lot of people, but including you, right? Can you talk about that?
I just happened to go into my. I was up from San Diego. I was in the Squirrel Barkers. I happened to be up in L.A. on that particular Sunday night. Of course, Sunday night was Ed Sullivan night for the entire nation. Everybody watched Ed Sullivan on Sunday night. And I had heard about the Beatles, but I'd never heard them. I just had heard this band from England. They're da-da-da-da-da. And I walk in, I go to my mom's apartment, and we watch Ed Sullivan. And here they are, the Beatles. And I go, oh, my God. So they did, I think it's All My Lovin' and I Want to Hold Your Hand, I think. I might be wrong. But my God, they were coming out of the TV screen. They just came out of that screen, and they grabbed you. They were so good live, of course. And what did they do? They changed the music. They changed the culture. They saved us all. They healed us all from Kennedy's assassination, which was 2 months prior to their appearance. It's an amazing thing if you look at it that way. It's almost divinely sent. There's the Beatles, man. Exciting times. Yeah.
And it seems like not long after that, you're in the folk scene, and you're at the Troubadour, and you see this guy named Jim McGuinn playing I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yeah.
But in a club that's, for folk music.
He was totally engrossed in that performance. And I went, wow, look at him. A lot of guts. And he was good. I mean, he was totally into this, doing this. And I didn't know him. I didn't really know him, Andy, until the first day I reported for the job I hoped I was getting.
Yeah.
The bass player. So, yeah, I didn't get to know any of those because I knew who they were. But I really got to know them as they got to know me when we started working together. Yeah.
Well, I love the story about how the Byrds come together, and especially the story about how Jim Dixon, the producer and their manager at that time, called you and asked you if they needed a bass player. And of course, you stretched the truth and said,
he says, hey, can you play the bass? And I said,
could you play?
Yeah, can you play the bass? And I went, yeah, I can handle that. Well, because I had a feeling I'd heard them sing, and I went, now mind you, I had high standards. Like I had been working with Vern and Rex Gosden. My God, they were good, and Don. But Vern, you know where he went in his career. He was huge in the late '80s. Rex was a songwriter after all that. He was very successful, as was Don and his group, the Kentucky, excuse me, I'll get it in a minute. But anyway,
the Bluegrass Cardinals, right?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Brain works.
But yeah, so you came together, and I think not long after that, your debut performance was at the Troubadour.
Yeah, but just to back it up a bit. So I said, I think I can handle that. But having heard them sing, Gene, Clark, Roger McGuinn, and David Crosby, and they were good. And they're doing Beatles songs and a couple songs Gene had written. So it took me about 2 seconds to say I can handle that. And I'm going, oh my God, I've never even picked up an electric bass in my life. I've messed around with a stand-up bass.
Right.
So can you come down in the next couple nights? We get together about 1 a.m. because we get the studio for free then. World Pacific was a jazz studio, really. And Dick Bach was the fellow that ran that studio. This is us by the way, this is us in Columbia. It's mostly a publicity shot because we have those dreadful suits on. That's another story.
Right.
And there's the bass that I went to the rehearsal in with. It's a $50 bass of unknown origin. I don't know if I borrowed it or bought it, but I know there was a figure of $50 involved. And it was made in Japan, and it worked. I mean, but when I got down there the first day, Roger was playing an acoustic Gibson 12-string with a pickup, and Gene had a guitar. Nobody had an electric guitar. I was the only one that had an electric rig, So it was pretty interesting, yeah.
Did you end up recording with that bass ever?
No, never.
Okay.
No,
okay.
Somehow when we we did. We would practice and we'd run it onto 2-track, but when we eventually got some backing, of course I got a bass, and Roger got the Rickenbacker 12-string. Everybody got a new gear and stuff. So, yeah.
That's a fun part of the story. That sounds like it would have been pretty nice.
We were literally starving. Mike Clark, Gene Clark, and I lived in a little apartment. It was sort of a garage apartment in Hollywood, and we were just trying to get along as best we could, And we would get these funny sessions. This guy was doing surf demos, and he'd have Mike and Gene, whoever was available, we'd go down and play these surf demos, and we'd each get $10. Go figure that one. So God knows what happened to that. So.
Well, I know the single for Mr. Tambourine Man comes out in May '65, and it ends up at #1 by the end of the next month, I think. So from then on, it actually, you can kind of feel it as you read the book. The pace of your life and the pace of the book picks up kind of together, and it's kind of a whirlwind, right? It's just everything is happening so fast.
Happening fast. We did have anybody that has seen A Hard Day's Night. We actually lived a bit of that. We had the girls jumping on the car and stuff, and I remember doing a show in Chicago, and the girls got on the stage and they stopped the show after 2 or 3 songs. So we got a little bit of that. I mean, whatever that meant, and but it was going quickly. And as Mr. Tambourine Man started climbing up the charts in America and England and Europe, it was going. It was great, fantastic.
Well, I want to talk about the sound of the Byrds for a bit, just so maybe we can hear a clip of a song from that first album, and we'd like to play a little bit of "Bells of Rimney" from the album Mr. Tambourine Man. And here it comes.
Oh, what will you give me? Say the sad bells of Rimney. Is there hope for the future? Say the proud bells of Rimney. Who made the violin? Say the black bells of Rimney. Who killed the miner? Say the grim bells of life.
Yeah, that was a great picture. That's the 5 happy birds in someone's office in New York City at Columbia Records. Just
Oh man, I mean, if we could go back to that for a second, that's the coolest bunch of guys I've ever seen.
Look, as you can see, Andy, we had no money, so we're looking pretty sketchy there. Gene, I mean, it's an amazing picture. I thought the Byrds were a great looking band, as far as the way we looked.
Yeah. Totally.
And especially we got a little money, we started to dress, but we always dressed nicely. We always wore sport coats and turtlenechts and all this and that.
As far as that song, I mean, no other band ever sounded like that, even before or since. You have of course, the 12-string is iconic. The vocals are incredible, but even the drumming is different. And you play the bass differently. You play the bass with pick. Which lent to that overall sound, right?
Well, I think it did. I got to tell you, if that's, to me, that one song is the Byrds. That's the completely says it all as far as what our sound was. Is the Bells of Rimney, and Mike Clark played brilliantly on that record. He wasn't the greatest drummer in the world, but he was hitting those cymbals, and it was like orchestral. It was like a monastery. Bells going off, and I love that song. So of course I cut it a couple of times, and then recently on the last record I did it with had Roger or rather David sing on it with Herb and I. But yeah,
right. And you play it live. I think I've seen you play it live a few years ago. Yeah, it's just.
But I think that the uniqueness of the Byrds is that we did not have a blueprint. We weren't a garage rock band, and we were basically going off of, I have to say it, we were going off Roger. Roger was probably the most seasoned player of all of us. David was a good player, good guitar player, unbelievable singer, as you all know, still is. And but we made a sound, and it wasn't like we were the greatest players. Oh, I couldn't play the bass. I probably figured it out by about the end of the first album. I started to figure out what I was doing, and Mike had moments of brilliance, and he had moments of just turning the beat around or racing us to the end of the song. But what we did when it was working, it was pretty magical.
Yeah.
It was a great group. I mean, I loved it. I love being in the Byrds. Yeah.
Well, and then Turn, Turn, Turn comes out. It's another #1 hit. And the next thing you know, you're booked on the Ed Sullivan Show in late '65. And it's less than 2 years after seeing the Beatles on the show, which changed your life.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah.
Talk about being on the show.
Well, I mean, if this is funny, I mean, I knew we were in trouble there, but I forgot this, and I remembered it in time to rewrite it and put it in the book. But what had happened was David was having issues with the producer and or director, Bob Precht, I believe his name was, but he was Ed's son-in-law, and it got pretty ugly. So to the point of him saying, "Listen, you little punk, you're not going to work on this show again, and you're fired." And now, wait a minute, we're on the show. We've flown to New York, and we've just got fired. We had hit one note. We just got fired. And Jim Dixon, who was managing us, begged them to keep us on the show. We flew back here about that won't happen again and everything. Yeah, we did this show, and there was some issues on the sound, but it wasn't bad at all. Really, it was our our problem. It was really not all of our problem, but my God, that was like surreal. You know, I mean, I know that other bands had issues. I know they asked Mick Jagger to say, let's spend some time together, right? Remember that? And I'm sure Morrison had some issues in the Doors.
Yeah, the Light My Fire had a line that needed to be changed, right?
Yeah, but hey, you know, you're in hindsight, you're doing a show. You're a guest on someone's show. In some way, you have to adhere to that. That's why when I talk about the Opry, where the Byrds were on the Opry, and afterwards I look back a year later and say, my God, we were disrespectful. That wasn't cool at all to do that. So I was quite an eye-opener at that time. We'll talk about that later. Yeah,
we'll definitely get there. And there's redemption there because you end up on the Opry later, even later, right? But but as far as this era, you know, a few things happened. Gene leaves the band just shortly after this, and I remember you saying you were turning into just a better and better band as far as the performances went. And 8 Miles High came out in March '66, and there's nothing like that ever before or since. And I know I remember you writing that the recording of that is just one that you hold in high regard, right?
Yeah, and we cut it twice, Andy. We cut it at RCA, and then we cut it at Columbia because Columbia wanted us to be in their studio, which was fine. The sad part of it was a great cut, and it was climbing the charts until Bill Gavin's tip sheet got hold of it, and everybody's getting a little nutty about drug this or that references, which weren't really in the song at all. I don't know where they came up with that, but all of a sudden the song disappeared. It was climbing, and it went away. It's too bad. It was a great record.
Yeah, it's that word high. I guess nobody can stand it. That was the word that they made Morrison. Yeah. They wanted Morrison to change, right?
Something. Yeah, it was sort of something. But we left. It still is remembered, and it's remembered well. It's remembered as a great Byrds song. So here we are. We go from covering Bob Dylan material and Turn, Turn, Turn. Of course, thanks to Pete Seeger, who put that wonderful connecting chorus to Turn, Turn, Turn. Right. And now we've gone from that to doing 8 Miles High as a band. So it really was incredible growth in a matter of a year and a half or two. Yeah. And Rock and Star too, as far as a track, you know.
Well, and speaking of growth, you soon after that become inspired to start writing your own songs. And it seems to come in a tidal wave all at once, really, like with the album Younger Than Yesterday. It comes out in early '67, and you've written half the songs on it.
All I can say is as I say in the book, is something when I was working for Hugh Masekela, it was really a demo session, but for this lady, Letta Ambulu, who was so sweet. And here we are, Crosby and I, and because we knew Hugh and he was managed by the same person we were. And most of the musicians are South African guys, and except for the conga player, was a pretty well-known guy. His name was Big Black, and he was a big black guy, and he played congas for Hugh sometimes. But that session was so exciting. I came home out of nowhere and picked up the guitar, and you'd think, oh, you worked with Hugh Masekela. She's like a Peggy Lee type chanteuse, right, singer. And I come home and I write a country song. So it's really odd. It was a weird thing there. And also I start writing every day. I don't know where that came from, but it opened up this old door, creaked open in my brain, and I start writing. Yeah,
amazing. And I got to say, I'm not just saying this, but your songs on that album are they're my favorite songs on the album because they're kind of, quintessential country rock, mainly because of Clarence White's playing and a little
bit. Was phenomenal. And I mean, my God, he came in for that session on Time Between, which is the book title and the first song I ever wrote. And I had known Clarence since I was 16. We were both 16. Comes in, plugs in his Telecaster, no gimmicks, no pull string, right into a twin amp, and plays this solo. And I spent 30, 40 minutes on the phone with Dwight Yoakam once. He was going on about that solo. It knocked him out. I said, yeah. It knocked us all out when we heard Clarence play that solo on Time Between.
Well, I promise for those for those Clarence White fans out there, we are going to talk more about him
Yes,
later, but we're gonna wait for Marty.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
But
Have You Seen Her Face, I think, is on Younger Than Yesterday. And I used Cecil Bernard, who was the South African piano player that Hugh was using. And he played on Have You Seen Her Face. Wonderful man. But like a lot of influence from Hugh on that song, on the changes.
Oh, man. Yeah, beautiful chord progression in that. And then, Girl with No Name is on that album. Like you said, Time Between. But it opens with this song that we're going to hear a little bit of right now, and that is So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
You bet.
So you wanna be a rock and roll star? Then listen now to what I say. Just get an electric guitar and take some time and learn how to play. And when your hair's comb right and your pants are tight, it's gonna be alright. Then it's time to go downtown where the agent man won't let you down. Sell your soul to the company who are waiting there to sell plasticware. And in a week or two, if you make the charts, the girls will tear you apart.
There's those Hard Day's Night girls.
That's right. Yeah. Roger bought, on one of our trips to Europe, he bought one of the first cassette players that Philips made out of Holland. And we taped one of the shows. The girls were screaming and ended up getting it on that record. Yeah. I love that record. It's smoking. That track is good. And Tom Petty did it really well too. The Heartbreak, a great version of it. Yeah.
Sure did. He did. And you wrote the first riff and the first verse, and then Roger
came in. Roger did the bridge, and in a week or two, if you make the charts, and it was really greatly influenced by Miriam Makeba, and he had worked for Miriam Makeba as a session player, and she had been married to Hugh Masekela. It's very incestuous, this whole movie. That particular bridge that he came up with was out of one of her songs, which was great. It worked fine.
Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, later that year, another person leaves. David Crosby leaves the band, and you guys put out the Notorious Byrds Brothers album, which another one I love. And then soon thereafter, after that album comes out, you met Graham Parsons, which kind of leads to another era in your life, and that's about 1968, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And as I had heard about the Beatles, but never had heard them, I had heard about Graham Parsons, but I'd never heard him or the band he was in. And we did meet in a bank in Beverly Hills. He had the same manager, Larry Spector, that we did. And was basically, their band had broken up. And I said, well, we're rehearsing tonight. You want to come down and sort of sit in with us if you want? We're looking. I wasn't sure if we were looking for a keyboard player, but I think we were at the time. So he says, yeah, I can play keyboards and all that. So he comes down, and he was familiar with the material. He wasn't a good piano player. He could play rhythm guitar, but he's a good singer. And he brought a couple great songs into the rehearsal, 100 Years From Now and Hickory Wind, which ended up going on the Sweetheart album.
Sure.
He had written, and funny enough, again, he had written these two songs with a guy that I knew, Bob Buchanan, who had been a Christy minstrel. So once again, it's all connected. But yeah, Graham, we liked it. Graham was a charming guy. He was just could be as sweet as could be and as can be. And Roger and I liked him. We hired him. Hired him and put my cousin in on drums, and we sort of were back on our feet. Because at one point, it was just the two of us. We did finish Notorious Byrd Brothers with the help of Gary Usher, our producer, who was wonderful to work with, a Columbia producer. So, and the album turned out good. Go figure, yeah.
And the idea though was that you guys hired Graham as a not as a full-fledged member of the band.
He wasn't in the Byrds per se. He was a hired hand, as was my cousin Kevin. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So just for that album. Well,
I mean, I don't know where it would have gone from there. Graham lasted through Sweetheart, basically.
Right.
Kevin,
That's true.
Further, we didn't do any more recording after that.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then Kevin left after that too, right?
Yes.
But yeah, the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album, and we'll get to it a little bit because we'll talk about the reunion tour as well. But it, as I may have said earlier, it's credited with launching country rock, widely known as doing that. But I always felt like the earlier Byrds stuff was clearly headed in that direction, especially the stuff you were writing 2 albums prior.
Oh, well, I mean, Andy, and I always say this, but we cut, Satisfied Mind. It was a huge hit for Porter Wagner, I believe in the late 50s, early 60s. Marty will probably know exactly when that was out. And it was such a cool song lyrically. It fit the Byrds, and a big rousting waltz time. How many times have you? And it was just great. So we cut that on the second album in 1965. Whoa, great picture.
We're jumping.
That song wasn't on.
Jumping ahead a little.
That's a funny picture, but I would love to talk to you about that later.
We will. I think it was a mistake.
Okay. That's all right.
But yeah, and yes, Satisfied Mind was on the second album. So you're right.
So we were. It wasn't a stretch for us to do that, and to clarify. And I think a lot of why I wrote that book was to clarify some things. The Byrds weren't trying to cross over and be a country band.
Right.
Like, oh, your career's over, let's be a country band. This does happen quite frequently. We weren't doing that. We were just making a country album and going to go back and be the Byrds. That's really was the plan. That was the one album we didn't write any songs on. McGuinn didn't write any, and I didn't write any. Graham had two good songs. And then we cut a bunch of some standards. Well, Woody Guthrie, I'm a Pilgrim, and Dylan. We were blessed. We were blessed twice. We got Mr. Tambourine Man with his permission to record it. And Dylan's stamp of approval was when he said, wow, you can dance to it, because Roger had taken it out of a 2/4 bluegrass groove and put it into a 4/4 groove, which you could dance to it. And then we get blessed with another song, You Ain't Going Nowhere. Bang, comes to my house of all things. I said, I just got a bunch of Dylan demos. So Roger said, over, let's listen to them. And You Ain't Going Nowhere, and Nothing Was Delivered. So great stuff. And I'm assuming Bob wrote that stuff while he was laid up after the motorcycle accident. But
with the band up in
exactly.
Woodstock, right?
Yeah. But so we had these two wonderful things handed to us, and You Ain't Going Nowhere had so much life in that song. It's gotten a lot of life,
It's great. Yeah. Well, I guess one last thing about Sweetheart. What can you talk about what that album? I mean, what it might have meant to you then, and how that's changed over time, especially in light of the, what it means to people, and the fact that you guys did that tour a few years ago.
Well, at the time, it was not my favorite Byrds album. I thought it was a very noble attempt, and I mean that only in good saying. I did a thing with Dwight Yoakam and Merle Haggard at the Country Music Hall of Fame, and we're talking about California country rock, and Sweetheart comes up, and Haggard looks up at me and goes, yeah, you almost had it. You almost had it right. I said, Merle, you know what? I can't argue with you. I said, it was almost there. I understand, because I came out of that background, but it took on a new life. It's of its own. So within a year or two, all of a sudden, Sweetheart is getting a little more attention. When it came out, it was probably the worst selling record we did. They didn't know what to do with it. I'm amazed Columbia let us do that, But look at what happened to it over in the next 4 or 5 years, and it's in the Rolling Stone top 100 albums, not any of the other albums of Sweetheart.
That's fascinating, right?
And it did open the floodgates in a good way. It opened the floodgates for what was inevitable in California, things built around 3/4 part harmony, or 2 3 and 4 part harmony, and in more of a country way, I guess that would be, you know.
Right.
I mean, if you look at it, like the Byrds, David Crosby had such a beautiful voice, but he didn't ever really approach his tenor vocal like a country tenor. It was more like he got it off the 4 freshmen.
Right.
It's like Brian Wilson. They heard that a little differently than the country third tenor part, you know.
Exactly. Not as much Ira Leuven as sort of Brian Wilson or
exactly.
like kind
it was just a
almost
different thing. Yeah, exactly. So
right.
And of course we did the Roger. We just did this. Yeah, we did the Sweetheart album. We did the harmonies and all that stuff. Yeah.
Well, soon thereafter, you long story short, you had to let Graham go from the Byrds, and you left the band shortly after that too. But then soon after that, you get back together with Graham, you become roommates and start writing songs together, right?
That is correct. I forgave Graham 70 times 7 in the biblical sense. And I will say it again. I did love that guy. He was a great guy, but I lost him. And I'll say that. But up right to where we start writing together and we're sharing a house, it was working good. It was working really good. From starting Sin City.
Yeah.
And I had a guitar and I brought it out and he's asleep, right? He's asleep in the other room. And I started going and we had that Larry Spector guy as our manager, who was a major thief. This old town filled with sin, it'll swallow you in if you've got some money to burn. Take it home right away. You've got 3 years to pay, and Satan is waiting his turn. And the chorus is, this old earthquake's gonna leave me in the poorhouse. It seems like this whole town's insane. On the 31st floor, a gold-plated door won't keep out the Lord's burning rain. So we put we're incorporating a Baptist hymn, and we're also writing that's about the culture at the time, and take it home right away. You've got 3 years to pay. Okay, nothing has changed radically. Graham came up with the second verse, which was he's such a character, you know. Oh God, the scientists say it'll all wash away. Well, you know what was funny in that particular time period? We were all reading Edgar Cayce books. I don't know if you know that is. Edgar Cayce was a seer, a prophet. He would go off into a trance and be asleep, and he said he had envisioned California falling into the ocean and this happening and the major earthquake. So we were sort of putting that in the song, you know, this old earthquake's going to leave me in the poorhouse. It was a funny song.
Right.
Yeah. And the last verse is about Bobby Kennedy. Man, a friend came around trying to clean up this town. Graham, I got him going, got him some coffee in him, and we finished that song about 30 minutes. And it's one of the best ones I've ever been a part of. And Graham, at that time we were cooking, and we wrote that and Devil in Disguise, Juanita, and a couple other things. And
Wheels and
Wheels, man, yeah, a lot of life in those songs. Yeah. The greatest thing you could ever hope for as a writer is when someone covers your songs, and a lot of people covered those 2 songs, you know. Quite well.
Well, you and Graham are a great partnership there for a bit, and of course, you know, a couple other guys were part of that first iteration of the Flying Burrito Brothers, which we'll mention. I guess this is the band that became the Flying Burrito Brothers: Chris Etheridge, Sneaky Pete Kleinow, and you two. And here you are with Jerry Moss, right?
Jerry Moss, who was the partner with Herb Alpert of A&M Records. Of course, Jerry was the M. And it's such a funny photo. And there we are, the Flying Burrito Brothers. And to this day, I said we were the outlaw band. There was one funny story, which is not in the book. I'm going to share it with you right now. So we're in the studio at A&M, or we were that night working. The next day, Jerry himself calls me. He says, Chris, you guys were in the studio last night, weren't you? I said, yeah. Well, don't leave those chicken bones around again, okay? You made a big mess. I said, we weren't eating last night, Jerry. That was Liza Minnelli. Liza Minnelli was in eating chicken last night. So, because it was the Burrito brothers, we were immediately accused of that. And then the other time was I caught the two roadies. They had a stencil that said property of the Flying Burrito brothers, and they were spraying it on someone else's gear. I went, stop that right now. So we had that rep already.
Wow. Well, you signed with A&M Records, which, you know, Jerry Moss was a co-founder of. Can you, I think you were hoping to maybe read a little bit of that passage in the book, right?
I would love to do that. Yeah. I'll read to you about the Flying Burrito brothers. Oh, man. Okay. The Flying Burrito brothers. You couldn't have assembled a finer bunch of criminals. The players, the band name, and the songs we were writing were the perfect ingredients for something either truly grand or totally insane. I tend to go to the latter on that sometimes. Over the next year, we drift back and forth between the two, but at that point, with the puzzle pieces of the band mostly in place, it was time to find that record deal. My former neighbor in Topanga Canyon, Tom Wilkes, was the art director at A&M Records, the label created by Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. Tom was aware that I had left the Byrds and thought A&M would be a great place for my new venture. Although Warner Brothers was interested, we ended up signing with A&M. We were the only country act on the label, and I don't think Jerry Moss or Herb Alpert knew what to expect. I don't think Jerry or Herb even had heard any of our songs. But they based their decision to sign us on probably because I had been in the Byrds, I'm assuming. And it's possible, like I said, they didn't even hear any of our music before agreeing to sign us. They were wonderful guys, though, I got to tell you. Our new attorney, Rosalie Morton, began the negotiations. She was a wonderful lawyer and the perfect fit for the Burritos. Remember that photo we just saw? Mm-hmm. Rosalie Morton with her leopard print briefcase. She took on A&M's legal team with full force. She came in there battling. We were doing quite well until the subject of our song publishing came up. Now, I had already given away my Byrds publishing to Tickner and Dixon for pennies. I thought I'd learned my lesson. During my last year with the band, Roger, Gwen, David Crosby, and I had enough sense, the last year of the band, to form our own publishing company, McKilby Music. Now, Graham and I should have just left it to Rosalie to negotiate our deal with A&M, but we went to the meeting for some unknown reason. Not being businessmen, we grew bored and impatient, wanting to get out of the door and get home. Can you imagine that? She's trying to do the deal. We agreed to let A&M publishing company, Irving Music, acquire half ownership of our songs. So stupid and short-sighted on my part. I just had gone through this, and and actually had started a publishing company with David and Roger. But this is the funny part. So her last words to Graham and I in front of everybody that day were, "You idiots will regret this the rest of your lives." So true. So true. That's the Burrito record deal being done. And there it is. And just to add to that, we were impatient. When's this over? Like kids, and she's going, she was good. She was a good attorney. She was mad. She was so mad. We undermined her,
Right.
So
well, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. It's an honest book, and that's a great example. I mean, you're willing to admit a mistake and learn from it and move on, and it's all good.
It's all good now, Andy. But I mean, oh my God,
right?
The biggest mistake. You're always going to end up, when you start out in this business, giving something up. You're going to give something up to get into that place. Get through the door, you're going to give up some publishing or whatever, and hopefully you can get it back later, whatever. But that happens to a lot of people.
Well, I hate to sort of summarize the next 10 years in in one sentence here, but essentially, there were lineup changes in that band, and it ended up kind of breaking up around 72 or so. You move on. You worked with so many great bands, and you did so many great solo records over the next 10 or more years with Manassas and Souther Hillman Fure and McGuinn Clark Hillman. Your 2 solo records on Sugar Hill were in the early 80s, were just great.
Thank you.
And I just want everyone to know you should get the book and read about that whole time and listen to the music. But just to move us ahead here, I definitely want to get us up to the mid 80s when the band comes together that becomes the Desert Rose Band. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh God, yeah. Well, after McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman, which was in 1978, and I got to tell you, it was a great band. Now, this is not McGuinn, Clark, Hillman. This is the Desert Rose Band, but that's okay. I'm going to get there real quick.
Oh, sure.
McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman, we decided that's it. Gene was having some problems, and he left the band. And Roger and I, once again, are holding the ball and trying to score with it. And it got to where that's it. We're done. Roger wanted to go back and do solo work as a folk singer, which he still does and does quite well. I wanted to go. I went back and started playing bluegrass with Al Perkins, one of my friends, and as a duet. And I went back to square one, playing mandolin and guitar and playing bluegrass festivals and folk clubs. Okay. Along comes 1984. I'm working. I have a 4-piece band. Bernie Ledden had left the Eagles. He was working with me. Jerry Sheff, who was Elvis Presley's bass player, wonderful musician. Bernie, Jerry, and myself, and Al Perkins. We had a great acoustic group. But I worked on Dan Fogelberg's album. He did High Country Snows, which was a bluegrass record. He had a lot of well-known bluegrass players on that record. And after that record, Dan had plans to go on the road. And he called me and asked me to put together a quartet to back him to promote the bluegrass part of the show he's going to do. And he wanted Herb Peterson to be involved because Herb was such a great singer, which was hard for me. I had to tell Al that he wasn't going to go on this tour. Right. But we had other things down the road. Al and I had wonderful things together. So it was John Jorgensen, who I had just met, Bill Bryson, Herb Peterson, and myself. We went out with Dan Fogelberg. I'm going to get to this point. And when we got back, it was a good tour. And then John he wanted to put a band together. And I'm going, I don't know about that. I don't know. I just don't know about that. And he's very insistent. And we did play a few shows with a different steel player and a different drummer and this and that. And John really was spot on with it. We got J.D. Manus, who I'd worked with in the Sweetheart of the Rodeo album, and a fellow named Steve Duncan, who I didn't know was a drummer, very good drummer. And then we started the Desert Rose Band. Okay, and I'm going, I don't know, we'll see, and I'm not looking for a record deal. And you know that old thing where you're not looking, it comes to you. And it did. I mean, all of a sudden we had a record deal offered to us, and Jim Halsey comes down to see us play at the Palomino with William Golden from the Oak Ridge Boys. And the Oak Ridge Boys were so kind to us when we were starting. We had nothing going on, and they gave us, they had us open for them in Las Vegas. Go figure that at the MGM Grand. Wonderful guys. And we went on a tour with them. But anyway, there's the Desert Rose Band in front of the Palomino about 1985, maybe 86. And we're just about, we got some clothes. We just bought some clothes. Herb and I got our nudie suits, JD and the rest. Anyway, so there we are. It was a fantastic group. And I'll tell you, musically, there was no baggage. Everybody was a professional. The live shows were in the 90th percentile. And if any of you out there have heard John Jorgensen play, he's a phenomenal musician, just phenomenal. And whether it's a Django Reinhardt French jazz piece of music or bluegrass or rock and roll, whatever, he's unbelievable.
Incredible, totally incredible.
As Herb, who's a fantastic singer, as Jade, all of them. Everybody was so on their game. So that was the longest I'd ever been in a band, 8 years.
Right.
And here's what happened. I mean, I basically went from being everybody's favorite second banana everybody's first lieutenant, and to running the band and writing.
Sure.
And I remember when the first song got to number 3 on the Billboard charts, and I'm telling my wife Connie, I said, "This isn't supposed to happen.
Right.
I don't understand why this is happening." She said, "Enjoy it." She said, "You did this. You earned this." I said, "I didn't. It's not supposed to go this way. I usually have it flops around, doesn't do anything." And then we proceeded to have a bunch of successful records for the next 5-6 years. Yeah.
Right. Killer band. And, you had, like you said, major success, Grammy nomination, I think, and TV appearances. And people should go and watch the Austin City Limits performance. It's just
absolutely live.
All those stuff on YouTube is great.
And it's great. The last part of it all, I still work with all of them.
Right.
With JD, Steve, sometimes he lives back in Branson, Missouri. John and Herb were originally scheduled to go out with me when the book came out. And of course, we had to move all the dates. And I think we're going to go out in the fall of 2021. So, and do the shows that we had previously moved. So, but that's nice. But we're still working together. Well, I work with Roger too.
Right. Well, speaking of him, I'm sort of right around this time, there's this new kind of sort of renewed interest and celebration about the Byrds. In the early 90s, the box set came out.
Yeah.
You recorded a few new songs, and then you were honored by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with your induction in 1991. And it's a really nice part of the book. And here's a photo from the book. Would you mind reading a little bit about that?
No, I love that night. It was very special, Andy. Very, very special night. And I'll tell you why. Right now, our legacy was really cemented when in January of 1991, the Byrds were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a huge acknowledgement from our peers and the record industry. The ceremony was still fairly new at the time and was not yet televised, which made the black tie event in the beautiful ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Gee, that was fun staying there. My wife. A private and special occasion. All 5 original members, Roger McGuinn, David Crosby, Gene Clark, Michael Clark, and myself, were in attendance. Roger, David, and I were seated at a table together, along with our beautiful wives. Michael and Gene's wives were not able to attend, and somehow those guys were seated at a different table. Now, Camilla McGuinn, Roger's wife, who's ever so gracious and loving, saw to it that Gene and Mike were seated with us, relocated to be with the rest of us. We were all together, and it was wonderful. That, in and of itself, was a rarity, as just about every group of inductees usually aren't speaking and haven't been for years. And it happens. But normally, separate tables are the best case scenario, but not in this case. We were back together as a band, and we were being honored for that special moment in time. Just before the program began, the images on the video monitors were interrupted. Rather than the videos of the inductees, a news broadcast came on. President George H.W. Bush announced that Desert Storm operation had begun. This was almost a mirror of our first year of success in 1965, when the Vietnam War loomed large and was changing our whole way of life in America. In that moment, at that ceremony, it felt like the times weren't changing as much as turning in a circle. We had made a complete revolution. Once the evening was underway, Don Henley of the Eagles gave the induction speech. He talked of growing up in Texas and being strongly influenced by the Byrds in 1965. He was eloquent and very complimentary. His words were very much appreciated by us all. We went up on stage when they had introduced us, and each of us gave a short speech. Then the 5 of us, with Jackson Browne and Don Henley sitting in, played 3 songs. Mr. Tambourine Man, Turn, 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 and I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better. Roger played 12-string and I played bass, while all 5 of us contributed vocals. Paul Schaefer and the house band, helped back us up. It was a perfect evening, and it was wonderful to be recognized and honored for our very best time together as a group. And that in itself, Andy, and this is not the book, that's the end of that, but I mean, just to be together that night was so special.
Right.
And then within a matter of 2 months, lost Gene and then Mike later.
And Mike, right.
It was sad, yeah. But
I'm
it
glad.
was a special time because we were all there together, enjoying that, like I say, that moment in time, you know.
Right. Well, I hate to jump ahead too much, but I definitely want to make time for Marty. And I want to, before we bring him out, I just want to kind of bring everyone up to speed. So, I think we'll jump back and talk about Tom Petty maybe a little bit later. But let's bring us up to about 2018. Finally, toward the end of the book, there's this great story about how the Sweetheart of the Rodeo anniversary tour came together and kicked off in 2018 with Marty and his fabulous Superlatives, one of the best bands ever, in my opinion. Just before we bring out Marty, can you just quickly talk about how that came about?
As in the beginning of the book, I talk about the fire that almost consumed us. And Connie and I, my wife and I, were living in a rented house until our house was rebuilt. Just a couple of rooms we lost. So, and I wasn't working at the time, but I get a phone call from Roger McGuinn, who happened to be in South America. I don't know why he was down there. I think he was working. And he said, I have an idea. See what you think. It's going to be the 50th anniversary of Sweetheart of the Rodeo coming up in this summer of 2018. Correct. Okay. I talked to Marty Stuart about going on the road and doing a show around the album. What do you think? And it took me about 2 seconds. I said, "Oh, I'm ready. When do we start?" I knew Marty from back when on Desert Rose days and all that, and I thought, "Oh my God, that's a fantastic idea." I said, "Roger, great idea, great." And I loved working with Roger, always did. Never had a problem working with Roger. We did some good stuff together, wrote some great songs together. So that started the ball rolling. And of course, we started many phone calls later. And we worked our schedule around Marty, who had a pretty busy schedule through that summer. And there we are in Nashville getting our picture taken. And there's those Superlatives. I love it. Love it. What a band. So probably one of the best, if not the best tour I ever went on in my life. Everybody played so well. These guys knew the music. It was just we had such a blast, and I just loved it. So that's how it happened. And then at a certain point, Roger says, I think we've just about covered it. In about December, we stopped. We went from, when did we go, honey? July. We went from July to December. And it was wonderful. A great time. People loved it. And what's interesting? So I'm talking about the Sweetheart of the Rodeo, unbeknownst to me, and I'm going, it was a pretty good record, wasn't great, but we sell out every place, right? We started the first show in Los Angeles is at the Ace Theater, which I'd never even heard of, downtown LA. We sold it out. And they had another night, we sell it out. But it was so much fun. I mean, musically, it was deadly.
I saw it. I saw the show here in Akron, down the road from here, and it was one of the best shows I've ever seen.
Well, I loved it when Roger came out, and then I would come out, and when we both came out, each side of the stage and playing, and we rehearsed our dialogue. We scripted that out. He was big on rehearsing.
Yeah.
And anyway.
Well, with that, what do you think about bringing out Marty? Ready?
Jeez, I don't know. After all that,
Well,
Marty Galen from the Jefferson Star. No,
oh, sure, yeah,
I love Marty.
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce him now. Marty Stuart is a Grammy-winning singer, songwriter, virtuoso musician. There he is. Played alongside pretty much all the masters, from Johnny Cash to Lester Flatt, who discovered him back when he was 12 years old. He's a worldwide ambassador for country music. He continues to make great music. With as I said, he leads one of the greatest bands, I think, on earth, the fabulous Superlatives.
I think he does.
And he's a visionary artist, country legend. Here he is. Thank you, Marty, for being here.
You know what? He's a nice man. He's a very sweet,
wonderful guy.
Hi, Marty.
Hi, brother. Chris. Hello, Andy.
Hey, how you doing, Marty?
I've enjoyed sitting here listening to these stories. And first of all, Chris, what a great book. I love that book.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you. You wrote something.
I grew up in Mississippi, watching, and this is in the 60s, listening to all those records that were making in California and watching all those TV shows from California. looking at Fender guitars that came from California. My dream was to go to California. And Chris, right off the bat, you drew me right in, like around your home, and and Rancho, and it just took me into that time of America and what it must have. It seems like kind of a Camelot kind of life you had going on there as a kid.
It did, buddy. I mean, it really was, and it was a wonderful time, and up until my dad died, and it was okay. We survived it all. It was kept moving. Yeah.
I like any town where you can still ride a horse into town from time to time. That's good.
It happened. It seriously happened. Yeah.
John Robertson, right? Yeah.
John Robertson, but I rode mine to school.
Oh yeah, sure, right.
It was a 3-room elementary school. Dating myself, a 3-room elementary school, right? And I rode my horse one day a couple times and taking time under the tree and take his bridle off and loosen his cinch, and that was it. Go home at the end of the day. What a life. Loved it.
Well, Andy, before we'll talk about anything you want to, but before we jump off the sweethearts subject, the thing that I loved about it was like fantasy camp for the Superlatives every night to get to play with Chris and Roger and get to play those songs. But I think if you could have been backstage, and a lot of times there were monitors backstage that would just show the stage. And from the moment the guitars started coming out, people started lining up in front of the stage just to have their pictures made by the guitars. And the thing that I took away from that tour more than anything else was the love that we experienced amongst ourselves. But what I saw in the audience was guys that were, in their 60s wearing their Byrds T-shirts that were buddies back then. And you could see that it touched their hearts, and they never thought they would see this again. And they never thought they would hear those songs again. And the love that they showed to Chris and Roger and the band and Clarence's guitar, and just the legacy and the magic of all that stuff. And the fact that it was still alive and well and in good standing. It was a thing to behold, and it's truly one of the highlights of my life, Chris. It was.
Marty, I've said it a million times. It was one of the best, if not the best tour I've ever gone on.
Well, and
you and I have gone on lots of tours, but I mean, you're right. There was so much love and respect between you and the guys and Roger and I. And I love Roger as you do. I love working with Roger. He's just wonderful. And by the way, Andy, Roger and I had the greatest road managers ever. Our wives.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Camilla and Connie and Connie Smith. Stuart also was right there helping everybody else. So we had wonderful, wonderful people. And of course, they're right behind us. They're pushing us right ahead. They're moving us.
But the thing that moved that tour forward more than anything else was, and this is not a stretch of the word, it was love. It was absolutely.
It was love. No, I just couldn't tell you. It was so. And the night you left me the suit, I mean, I couldn't believe you did that. And then Chris Scruggs gives me his bass. My gosh, Marty, how many times am I going to get to play that bass in my life? But it's on the wall back there. But I mean, you guys were just fantastic. And every night, Andy, I'd go when they'd start the show, or before we'd start the second part of the show, and then the Superlatives were on, I'd sit in the side of the stage. I was in awe.
Oh,
These guys took off on Tom Petty's
Running Down a Dream.
Thank you. My brain doesn't work anymore. Man, I mean, he's my favorite mandolin player. He's deadly. He's deadly.
Well, you're my favorite bass.
Don't do that. You're a good player.
Well, one of the things we were flipping tours because the Superlatives we were working shows with Chris and Roger, but we also had a bunch of shows that we were committed to doing with Chris Stapleton. And one night we had a night off with Chris and Roger, but we were across the way with Chris Stapleton, and Chris Hillman and Connie came by to see the Stapleton show. Mm-hmm. And Chris was sitting by the monitor console, and that place was, probably had 15,000, 20,000 people. I don't know. And I was looking out across there, and I remember tapping you on the shoulder, Chris, and I go, you see all that out there? You helped cause every bit of that, because Chris lit the fuse on everything that is happening in country music today. Oh, yeah. No, don't give me that. But it's true. It's absolutely true. It goes back to that man right there.
Right. Whether you like it or not, right? Like if
there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, Marty, I mean, God blessed me. I was a very lucky guy. I mean, I can't tell you. I really was. I wasn't the greatest musician or singer or anything. I just was a very lucky fella. I mean, that day I got the phone call about the Byrds bass job. I was, yeah, I can handle it. Man, it took me a long time to get a handle on that bass. But anyway, so.
You did.
We're glad you answered the question that way, though. I'm glad you said that you could play.
Yeah. Last thing, Andy, and I'll shut up. I saw somewhere along the way in one of those Byrds anthologies, somebody had done a family tree. Remember that, Chris Hillman?
Yeah,
of the Byrds and everything that had gone forth from the Byrds. But after I got to know Chris and really got to know his musical life and his legacy, about 80% of that can be turned into Chris's world, because Chris put more people together, more bands together, got more songs into the right homes than I ever imagined. It's incredible. He's the greatest matchmaker in the world when it comes to music. It's true.
On that tour, Roger says to me one night, afterwards we're back at the hotel, wherever, and he says, "How many bands were you in anyway?" And I said, "About 8." I said, I don't know, every time, either every time I'd get in a band, someone would die or they'd break up. I said, maybe it was me. I don't know. So we had so much fun on that tour, man.
It was great.
Well, as somebody who saw it, and as somebody who wasn't around in the '60s to be able to see, the Byrds the first time, I couldn't have been more grateful to be able to catch that tour, and you could feel the love from the audience, from the stage to the audience. You really could. So it was amazing, and I'd love to just hear if we can play a little snippet from your Ace Theater performance in July of 2018. We just have a little clip of that to play. It's a nice little.
I was so in awe playing guitar next to this guy. Not only is he a great mandolin player, he's a killer flat picker, and of course on the pull string. But anyway.
Well,
I love doing Pilgrim with you, man. I was like, oh my God, I got to better do this right. I'm gonna get it if I don't get this right.
So everyone should listen here. They're gonna hear a little bit of singing and then some interplay between the two acoustic guitars soloing. It's very nice.
I'm going down to the river of Jordan just to ease my wearisome soul. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, good Lord, I do believe it would make me whole.
It's great.
Just as good tonight as it was that night.
I don't think that song ever swung quite like that before. I mean, like that's. I mean, it didn't on the original album as much as it does there. That band is just so great.
Huh.
Did you tell me you learned that song around Clarence, Chris?
Yeah, I really learned it from him doing the Colonel's kind of instrumental of it. And then I got the words. Of course, when we went and did it, Sweetheart, I got the words to it and all that. But yeah.
Well, I actually want to talk about Clarence White since you bring him up. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's somebody I know who's very special to both of you in different ways, and you both have a deep connection to him. And he's, of course, for those who don't know, one of the greatest guitar players of all time, one of my all-time favorites. Mm-hmm. Chris, do you mind starting just talking about meeting Clarence?
Andy and Marty. The first time I saw Clarence, we drove up to the Ash Grove from San Diego, about 140-mile drive, and they were the Country Boys then. Roland, this is actually when Scott was playing mandolin with him. Roland was in Germany in the army, but Clarence had a look, buddy. I mean, he's over there. He had the cool hair. He he had Jim McReynolds hair. Okay, cool back and didn't smile, and he's playing ever so delicately, but you know how he played, Marty. He'd make the downbeat.
Mm-hmm.
He would just make it. You know, those timing things. And it was so amazing to watch him. And he wasn't doing as much lead when I first met him. And then Doc Watson came through the Ash Grove, and Marty was learning from Joe Maphis, Doc Watson, anybody that was around, you know. And of course, when Tony Rice was about 12, Marty took him under his wing. And Tony and Larry Rice, the Rice family lived in LA at that particular time. So.
And Marty, you became aware of Clarence, I think, through his brother Roland, right?
His brother Roland, as Chris said, they had the band called the Country Boys and then the Kentucky Colonels. And then for, one reason or another, Roland came to Nashville. I think he got a job with Bill Monroe for a spell. And then when Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs broke up, Lester put a band together, and Roland was Lester's mandolin player. And so there was something about him. He had the same kind of cool factor, that Clarence did that, Chris is talking about. And I was kind of drawn to him when I'd see Lester Flatt's band on TV. So anyway, we became friends when I went on the Bluegrass Festival circuit. I think I was 12 years old. And Roland to this minute, he is a great teacher. He has so much patience in his heart for young musicians that want to learn how to play bluegrass music and the mandolin and whatever. So he showed me some things, and he also gave me his phone number and invited me to come to Nashville sometimes, just ride along. So I eventually did that, and Lester gave me a job. But that's how I got involved with the family. And I noticed there was a stack of Byrds records. Roland had a great record collection. There was Kentucky Colonels records, but there were a lot of Byrds records. I said, "What's up with all the Byrds records?" He said, "It's my brother Clarence that plays the guitar with him." And I looked over there. He's kind of like had that James Dean factor, didn't he, Chris?
Yeah.
And cool. But then I started listening to the Byrds records, and it sounded like a steel guitar being played on a Telecaster. And I said, "How's he doing that?" And Roland kind of explained it to me. And that just really got my ear. It sounded like Ralph Mooney and James Burton and Clarence White and everything that was cool about California. Roy Nichols, all those guys, Joe Maphis, I could hear it all in there. But Clarence had his own thing. And I was really, really, really drawn to that. And I got Shot Jackson at Showbud Guitars to make me some sort of pull string guitar back in the 70s. And I couldn't really do much with it. But Clarence lost his life. And was it 73, Chris?
Something like that. It was just tragic, Andy, as you know the story, but tragic.
And, his wife, Susie, moved back to the East Coast. She was from Kentucky, and she started coming around Roland's house and bringing Clarence and her and Clarence's children, Michelle and Bradley. So they were like family. And I got a call from Susie one night and said, "I'm thinking about selling one of Clarence's guitars. Would you be interested?" I said, "Absolutely." Didn't even know what she was talking about. And I just got a job with Johnny Cash. And so I went to Kentucky and took Roland's son Lawrence with me, and it was a Stratocaster that they had used as a parts guitar for Clarence's Telly, the famous Telly. And while I was there, I said, "Would you mind showing me the famous guitar?" And she did, and she opened the case, and it was missing a string. And she said, "That's the one you really wanted." And I went, "Well, anybody want to play it?" She said, "Could want it?" I said, "What do you mean what I want it?" But at the end of the day, I said, I just put my checkbook on the table. When my mom worked at a bank, I said, "Pretty much fill in your number within reason. And if I don't have it, I'll go get the money." But Susie, it was the 54 Strat, Clarence's guitar, some Byrds paraphernalia, and a couple of nudie suits. And she wanted $1,250 for it. I went, "Susie," I said, "the E string on that guitar is worth it." She said, "I know what the guitar is worth, but I want it to be in somebody's hands that will care for it and honor it." And so that's how it went down. And it has been a pleasure and a responsibility ever since then. And just when I think I know how to play it, I hear something that Clarence did on it, and I go, "Back to the woodshed for you, my boy." Nobody can touch him. Nobody can touch him.
When you mentioned Roland as a great teacher, I forgot, Marty, when he came back to the States, he was out of the Army. He spent one night over, I was living on Fountain Avenue in LA, and he spent 3 or 4 hours with me one night, showing me mandolin stuff. I'll never forget that. Yeah. Yeah, he's a great guy.
He's a great guy. Wonderful guy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm speaking for myself. And all music fans, Marty. I'm glad that you have that guitar because you really do honor Clarence with your playing, and by taking it out there everywhere you go. I mean, that's the best way you can do it, really.
Well, when I first got that guitar, I was in Johnny Cash's band, and then, after those years, started our own band. And Chris, it was about the time you guys had Desert Rose. We went to, me and my band went to Japan for the first time. And of course, before you go on stage, if you remember, everybody wants to take your picture, like in the press.
Mm-hmm.
So we had on our cowboy clothes and then looking cool. And every one of the photographers went straight down to the guitar.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't care about us at all.
Yeah.
Right to the guitar.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I want to hear if we can just play a little clip of Clarence White playing. This is actually before he had the pull string B-bender. This is on Time Between, which is the namesake of Chris's book. But it's just, So let's just hear a little bit of that.
All the days of turning years only emphasize my fears since you said goodbye. I can hear your voice at night. I can read the words you write. It's only love. Through love and trust, it's gonna work out fine. The only pain I feel is all this time between you and me. You and me. It's gonna
that last riff, Marty, it's swinging, and he's right out of a Fender Twin. There's no gimmicks, nothing. He's just going,
Man, I see. That was a good day at the office, Chris.
Oh, buddy, I just went, man. Remember I told you Dwight's on the phone with me for 40 minutes?
Oh, he can do 20 minutes on that solo. He's done it for me. He loves that solo.
Yeah.
I see palm trees and California sunsets. That's right there what made me want to go to California. It's your fault.
I actually liked, I liked the pull string. I think he was brilliant with it. But sometimes I just like to listen to him play acoustic. That timing was just, just like on that solo. He would just go. He'd just get there. He'd get to the end of the bar.
Or emphasize beats that you might not expect, like the second beat instead of the first or whatever.
There's a Bahamian guitarist named Joseph Spence, and he came out and played the Ash Grove, but he played the guitar. I swear, I think Clarence must have sat with him because he had that weird timing that Clarence developed, I think.
That's true. I never thought about that.
Joseph Spence, it was really funky stuff, but it was the way he hit that downbeat, man.
Go ahead, Marty.
I was just like, Clarence's right hand was deadly, and that's what set him apart in so many ways. And the closest guy that I've ever come to her, and I've never been able to meet him, and I love Bob Warford, was a guy in Southern California. Warford. There's a song Linda Ronstadt did called "Dark End of the Street." One of those albums back in the '70s, and Warford played the pull string solo, and it's as close to Clarence as anybody I've ever heard. And I've always wanted to meet Bob and shake his hand and say, "You win." But back to what you were saying, Chris, about the pull string. There is some recordings that I think John Delgado did, and the record is called Nashville West. Yeah, it was club recordings of Clarence and Gib Gilbo and Gene Parsons and some guys, and it was pre-pull string, and it is some of the most deadly Telecaster hillbilly country rock and roll I've ever heard in my life. Pre-pull string, and like you said, he didn't have to worry about pulling that string. It wasn't an obligation then; it was just coming out of his soul. That was really awesome. Check that record out.
Before we hired him in the Byrds, he would be driving up to Bakersfield and doing Stuart sessions Now, somewhere in my house, I have CD with those songs that Clarence played on of Win Stewart's. Unbelievable. Okay. The two of them together. And I've got to find that somewhere. It's in here somewhere.
And Ralph Mooney was the steel player on those sessions, and it was seamless. You could hardly tell when Mooney quit playing and Clarence started. They were, I mean, it was beautiful. It was poetry. Poetry.
Yeah.
And
Boy, we're off deep in the guitar world now.
yeah, I mean, like I think Marty might have said, you can hear traces of James Burton, you can hear Don Rich in there. But it's something completely new.
So,
and I gotta think when people heard that for the first time, it must have been incredible or just very, very strange, to hear something like that for the first time. Mm-hmm. Amazing. Quintessential country rock. That's what I think.
Well, one of my regrets, and we're all geniuses at hindsight, I wish I'd have stayed in the Byrds another 4 months, and it was time for me to move on, but I don't know if I made the right, but that's watered downstream now. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I mean, Clarence was just amazing. And he was a sweet guy, man. And Susie, sweet, just wonderful people. Wonderful people.
You bet.
And his dad, Pop, would get on stage with him and play harmonica sometimes. He was a sweet guy too. I never knew his mom. I don't know if she was around there.
I met Clarence one time, and it was at a truck stop in Maryland. And Roland and Clarence and Eric, their other brother Eric, had started the New Kentucky Colonels back up.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that Roland had played in, I think it was Indian Springs, Maryland, or somewhere like that. And Lester had played at another place. But I arranged it. Roland needed a ride home. And so I got Lester's bus to stop at a truck stop. So I must have been like 14 or 15. And we picked up Roland, and Clarence was there and Eric was there. And that's the only time I ever met Clarence. Mm-hmm. And then Roland, it was just a few months later that Clarence lost his life. But in the 90s, Chris, I was doing some radio interview. We were playing up around Lancaster, Palmdale, up in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And after the radio interview, I asked the disc jockey, I said, "Can you stay on the line? I want to ask you something." And I believe Clarence is he buried in Lancaster or Palmdale?
I don't know.
I think it's Lancaster. And I asked him, I said, "Can you track down a grave for me?" And I said, I would like to take flowers to a friend of mine. And he did. And so when we got out to that town, the radio station guy picked me up, took me out to the cemetery, and somehow word had got out. And when I got there, everybody was back. And they just kind of at a respectful distance. And I laid the flowers down. I spent a minute. And when I looked up, Clarence's mom was there.
Oh, my gosh. Uh-huh.
And that's the only time I ever got to meet her.
Yeah.
And they were French-Canadian people, really special people, precious people, precious people. Yeah.
Well, I know you both have a lot of other friends and musicians in common, and we couldn't possibly list them all here. Probably some of the same mentors, obviously, but one person I know you both worked with that I did want to talk about just briefly is Tom Petty. You both worked with him in different times, and I think you both worked with all the Heartbreakers as well. Marty, can you talk about any time you ended up spending with Tom?
Well, the first time I ever met those guys, I think on Johnny Cash's second American Recordings record.
Yeah.
Unchained. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and me. We were the backup band for that whole project. And that's where I'd lightly known them, but we spent a lot of time in the studio. And it's kind of like being around Chris or Roger, and they're one of those the Heartbreakers are one of those old fraternities that kind of once you're in and you're a family member, it's that way for life, I felt. And so that experience in the 90s bonded me with the Heartbreakers and bonded them with me. And Campbell and Chinner and Bugs and, Ventmont and Tom, they just all became kind of like family. And without question, they were the best rock and roll band in America standing. At the end of their run. There was nobody that could come close to them. And what I loved about them is they took the best of what Chris and Roger and David and Gene and Michael did, and they took the best of so many bands and kept it alive and presented it in a way to new generations of people with respect and integrity and dignity and honor. And they, on top of that, like I said, they were just the best. And to this day, Campbell remains my favorite rock and roll guitar player. He is the best rock and roll guitar player on planet Earth, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I still love that band. I listen to the Tom Petty Chettle a lot, and it inspires me, and it informs me, it educates me. And they were, on top of being rock stars, they were folk heroes, but they were also, teachers. They were professors of American music. And Tom, if anybody has never heard Tom Petty's Buried Treasures radio show, go subscribe. He's a great host, and he will lead you into waters that you can absolutely trust in.
Yeah.
What I loved about Tom, Marty, and the Heartbreakers, if they heard a song they liked, even with Bo Diddley, whatever, they'd cut it. I love that. So this free abandon they had about music, and I remember I went over with Herb before we did this record, and I got caught because I wasn't prepared. Tom says, "Play me a couple of your songs." I go, "Geez, I wasn't ready." Okay, and he says, "Oh, it's going to be a folk album." I says, "Man, I don't know." He says, "That's fine." So he was ready to go wherever I wanted to go with it. I said, "I don't know what we're going to do with it." And it's only later that Ryan, I said, I always used to bug me because I held Tom in such awe. And I said, "Do you think he liked?" He said, "No, he loved your album. He just wanted more drums." He likes drums on there, which we did put. We put Steve Ferroni on a lot of stuff. Anyway, no, they're all wonderful guys. I mean, look, it speaks volumes. He's got the same guys that he's for 40 years as you, and you're both were great band leaders. You knew how to run a band, and the respect is there.
Chris, is your project the last project that Tom did?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know what to say about that, but of course I listen to it like you do with all your records. You go, "I wish I'd have done that different. I wish I'd have done that." But no, that was the last one. But he did say when I profusely thanked him at some point, probably the last conversation, I said, I can't tell you what this means. It's a great way to close it out. And he said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, this is it, this record." He said, "No, it isn't. I'm not done with you. I want to make a rock record with you, and I want to make a country record." And I went, man, that was the most wonderful thing to hear. That was like the stamp of approval. And bless his heart, boy, that broke us all, broke our hearts when he passed away. I was in Nashville. I'll never forget that. Yeah. Anyway,
I remember I think I met up with you, Chris, a few days later in Kent. Here, you had a few more shows to do on that tour, and it was a really sad time, and it was really kind of a heartbreaking show, even. But it was meaningful, and I'm glad you.
Well, I was going to go on. Roger Gwynn called me up to don't you cancel those shows. Tom wouldn't like that at all. He was right. He's go out and play for Tom, do it and celebrate Tom's life and play him the song, and we did.
And Chris, remember the first night we played the Sweetheart Tour? It was at the Ace Hotel in L.A. and Tom's wife came, and Mike Campbell came, and Jenner came, and some Heartbreakers came, and I felt like that just being in the presence of Chris and Roger, that was probably the best medicine they could have had, because they knew the language and they knew what it was unspoken. It came from the heart.
Well, I remember Dana was there, and Mike sat in.
Yep.
With us, yeah. And then we went to Tom's memorial. It was at this restaurant in Malibu, and that was nice, Yeah.
Well, Biding My Time, your last record, is brilliant, and I'm sure it's partly due to Tom Petty, but the songs are great.
It was Ryan and Tom. Ryan is one hell of an engineer, I'll tell you. No one's ever gotten me to sing that. He's got such a good vocals on me. And the other thing, Marty, was, and I love Petty for this. He says, "Chris, just sing the lead. Would you just go out and sing while they're playing?" I said, "Yeah, that's the way I wanted to do it." Right. I hated putting phones on, but it worked out great. So.
Well, and it doesn't necessarily sound like a Tom Petty production. It sounds like you. The whole thing sounds like you. Even though
the other thing Tom says to Jorgensen, he says, "You don't need to overdub your guitar solo. Just play it now." See, that's music. And John turns around. We did Walk walk right back, Everly Brothers, right? And John takes a solo, man, it was deadly, and Tom says, just play it. And John didn't have time to think. See, he didn't have time to think about it. He just played it. It was beautiful. You know this. You go in and play the music. Just play it, right? Yeah, we have to overdub sometimes, but,
And this needs to be said as well about your singing. I live with a pretty dangerous singer. Connie Smith.
You better believe it.
Connie Smith is a dangerous singer, and I tell you, I tuned her into the Byrds. She was kind of like, I loved the Byrds at face value, like everybody else did, but I took her way inside of the Byrds with the guys, and she loves Roger singing. But man, she would leave those shows going, Chris Hillman is a great singer.
Oh, I remember she said that to Connie. I couldn't believe it. That made my whole life. I mean, I never was a great singer. I learned how to sing better. I learned how to commit, as you did. We both learned how to emote, to be an actor with that lyric. And have anybody like on Connie Smith's level say that.
Yeah, well, she loves her singing.
She's sweet, lovely.
Well, there's a whole little list here of connections that I thought of that between you guys. Most important one, of course, is that you're both married to amazing women named Connie. And it sounds like the Connies have been together, together.
I love his Connie too.
Yeah, I do too. I love her too.
Is she there? Hi, Connie.
She's right. Connie, will you say hi, Marty?
Hi, Marty. I'm back.
She's right in the back here. She won't come.
Hi, Connie.
Hi, Marty.
Well, and actually, that Connie reminded me the other day that Marty had recorded the song "Wheels," written by Chris and Graham. So that was on his Love and Luck album back in the 90s.
It was great. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Another connection is that Marty once presented Chris with a Americana Music Association award.
She did. I called you up and you were there. I'll never forget that. And we hadn't been hanging out too much. We knew each other, like you say, from Desert Rose and your days on MCA and all that. But yeah, you came down and did that. It was a wonderful thing. Wonderful gesture, buddy.
I'm telling you. And it's so great. We had this drummer named, or this bass player named Paul Martin in the Superlatives for a while. And I love Paul Martin. And Paul's son, March, came out on the road with us. And March is about 12 years old, and he's a cat. March, we were in Colorado. He'd been sleeping, and he got up and he raised the curtain, and there was Colorado for the first time. And March, being 12 years old, said, "Man, just when you think you've seen everything, there's more."
Oh.
But I felt like, I knew Chris. I thought till we went, and you don't know a man till you ride the river with him, and the Chris that I thought I knew and the Chris that I know now, he's a brother, he's family, and man, he is such a profound.
You are to us too. We love
no,
you.
but it's true. It's true.
We love you dearly, Marty. You know that. Always, as I said, it was just such a wonderful tour we went on. And that's just going to remain a wonderful memory at this point.
Let's call Roger about 1 o'clock in the morning and say, Roger, we have an idea.
Yeah.
Let's do it some more.
Yeah. We're going to tribute to David Crosby.
Maybe we could call him and get him on this call. That would be fun.
I love David. And we would every night after those shows we did with Marty and the Superlatives and Roger, I'd be up with our wives having a martini, and of course we'd always have a David story. But we both we love David. We really do love him. Are we going to work with him again? No, not going to happen. Bless his heart, but
Yes. Well, I also want to mention you both have albums called Way Out West, which are both great albums, very different. Chris's album is a duet album with her.
Mine's out of print.
But is it? Okay. But one thing I do want to mention before we say goodbye to Marty, because I know he needs to move along, but you're both inducted into Hall of Fames now. So Chris, as we said, was a 1991 inductee into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Marty has had a recent induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame.
Well deserved. I sent you a note when that happened. I don't know if
I got it.
You did?
I saved it.
I said well deserved.
Thank you, brother.
Absolutely. You have kept the real music alive. You have kept it alive, and we have to wade through a bunch of, let's just say, the show business in a way, but you've kept the real music going.
It's a great mission. It's a great mission. But when you're ready to play again, when you and Roger are ready to play again, the answer is yes, and that's a standing yes, and you know that.
Oh, buddy, in a minute. That goes for going in the studio too. We'll see where we all end up. We'll see what happens when you get through all this garbage and get back to work on. Get back.
Are you going to write another book?
No, I don't know.
You left me hanging. Right?
Well, I don't know. I was telling Andy earlier. I said there's a great short story about old John Robertson there somewhere in my head because he was such an interesting man. And we'll see what happens with that deal. I don't know.
That could be a children's book. That might be a nice way to do that one.
you know, Andy, there was a guy named Don Helms that played all the steel guitar parts on Hank Williams.
Hank Williams, right?
He was either a Jerry Byrd or Don Helms, but Don Helms was the guy. And Don Helms was the guy you could go to and ask about Hank Williams stories and get them confirmed or rejected. But Don Helms, Hank stories or any other stories, they were consistent and they were true, and he didn't embellish. The fish didn't get bigger as the years went on, you know. And there are so few guys that tell it like it is, and that's what another thing I learned about Chris. He'll tell you the same story 40 times, and it'll be the same story, and it's the way it is. And
I do tell the story 40 times.
Research it.
That's hilarious.
That's what I think about the book.
It's like I said earlier. It's a very honest book. Chris doesn't go out of his way to make anybody look bad, but he tells it like it is. And one thing I got to say that I admire about you, Chris, is that you've had all these bandmates over the years, and this is pretty unusual. You still love these guys after you've even people you couldn't work with anymore. That's very admirable.
I do. You know, I really do. Living or dead, I don't hold any animosity towards anybody.
Right.
I had great times with everybody, and it's not some noble sentiment. It's really, I meant that. You know, I loved all of them. And I was just reading today. I was perusing the book, and I read about where Mike dies. Mike Clark. It just broke me up because I called in the book where I finally find out where he is. And I called the number, and he had died 2 hours before I called in his mother's arms. That was the saddest thing. He was, terrible alcohol. Anyway, I have a question for you, Marty. So when did Porter Wagner's Satisfied Mind come out? Do you remember the era? Was it late 50s?
Well, it was the early 50s, early to mid 50s originally.
Okay. Because I was telling Andy earlier, so that was, we cut that on the second Byrds album because we liked the song. So we were already jumping into that way early,
Sure.
Sweetheart. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Earlier than you get credit for sometimes, I think. I think Sweetheart of the Rodeo kind of has eclipsed some of that by being such a landmark thing. But yeah, you were definitely headed in that direction. Marty, any last thoughts before we bid you farewell?
Well, my love to Chris and Connie and to all my birds. The other thing that the last thing as you read through Chris's book and we talk about people, as time goes on, people tend to become looked upon not as human liars, like Chris just said, but they become statues and immortal in our heads, and that's what they are. But one of the things that that's very true about these guys that I remember is, man, they were just kids. The Byrds, they were just kids thrown into the fray, into an uninvented industry yet, and so any sins are to be forgiven. But the music speaks, for everything as it goes on, and the music will live on and on and on. It's just part of our atmosphere now, the music that these guys made. And the beauty of it is Chris is still just as relevant and good or better now than he's ever been. And anything that he does is a treasure. It's a gift. And so it's just a pleasure to know him. He's my brother.
Oh, I love you, man. You're a wonderful friend.
That's how it is.
Well, I appreciate it. Always have, always appreciated you. So, yeah. This
Well,
has been a very sweet time.
beautifully said. Well, before we move on to just a couple last thoughts with Chris, we want to thank Marty again for being here so
you.
much. Great seeing you as always.
I love that guitar.
Take care, Marty. Thanks so much.
Marty, thank you, man.
Take care.
Love you.
Well, Chris, I guess just to wrap up, my friends over here who I work with are telling me we might not have time for questions from the viewers, or maybe we just don't have any. But either way, I just wanted to kind of close with some final thoughts for you. You know, just about the book. I think I've mentioned it a couple times. I really enjoyed reading it. I know your music, you know, so I thought I knew the story pretty well, but it was really enlightening for me, and I learned a lot about you personally, and just little facts that I had never picked up over the years, including things like you were possibly the first musician to move to Laurel Canyon.
I don't know if that was true or not. I might have stretched it a bit, but yeah, I think I was. I don't recall anybody else being up there then. Whatever.
Right. Yeah. I also didn't know that Jerry Wexler was your brother-in-law, which is a kind of
he was. My Connie's sister, Renee, was married to Jerry. I had the greatest stories. Oh, boy. Jerry told me that some wonderful things. We'll discuss that later. But I mean, about those days when they started Atlantic and how they would go to stations with records in the back of their car. You know, it's wonderful stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really highly recommend everyone get this book. And I heard you're soon going to be working on the audiobook version of the book, right?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, Andy. The audio book is what, honey? Oh,
I actually
Penguin Random is doing the audio book, and I will start doing that next week. I'll start narrating that book. I tried to get Ronald Coleman or Robert Mitchum, but they're not with us anymore. I thought they'd be great to narrate. I'm kidding.
Yeah, right.
But
you'll do it. I think you'll do it.
And then BMG is going to put a paperback version of the book out, which is really sweet too. So, I mean, I never anticipated the response to this book. I mean, within 2 months, it was in second printing. I didn't thought that was, you know, I said, okay, put it out, see what happens, you know.
Yeah, but like you said, the audiobook and the paperback will come out simultaneously sometime this summer.
Yes, in the summer.
And yeah, I guess the last thing I'll just mention, I mean, like I said, you were the thing that really stuck out to me, and you never drew attention to it in the book, but just something I noticed is that you, like I said, you parted ways with people, but you always stuck with people like they were family, and that's it's a good characteristic, and you're a good man.
I wanted to strangle Graham Parsons many times, but I loved him dearly, like a brother. So it was most like a sibling issue. I don't hold any animosity towards anybody living or dead. Why?
Yeah.
Point. You know.
And the other thing I'll say is, it really comes out that you were never really in this for the fame. You never quite say it like that, but it just seems like it's always been about the music for you.
Tom Petty's last interview, I can't remember where it was, but he said, I don't think Chris ever liked show business. And I saw that and I went, boy, is that spot on. I didn't want to be the next Bruce Springsteen. I wasn't good enough to be the next Bruce Springsteen. I was a musician. I liked playing as a musician within a trio, trio, quintet, whatever. You know what I mean? You're
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you move seamlessly between styles, probably more seamlessly than anyone I can think of, really, between bluegrass, traditional country.
I had some great, you know what else, Andy? I had some great teachers. Stephen Stills was a great teacher in 1973. Fantastic. He's on top of his game then. Yeah. Roger and David were great singers, and Gene was great. You know, I had some good people that I listened to. I learned from them, you know, by osmosis. I just absorbed what they did, you know. So.
Well, I'm glad we could all learn from you over the years too. So.
That's very kind of you.
Chris, any final thoughts before we call her night?
I just thank you for all you guys do, and having me on the show, and having Marty on was really a treat. He's very special.
Great man.
Yeah.
Well, I got to say, this was incredibly fun for me. Your music has brought me a lot of joy over the years, and on behalf of the Rock Hall, we're honored that you joined us tonight, and congratulations on the great book. And everyone should, like I said, go to our online store at rockhall.com, buy one of the limited number of signed copies of Chris's new book. Whether you get one from us or somewhere else, just get the book. Look out for that audiobook this summer, as I said. Keep an ear out for this interview on Sirius XM in the coming weeks. And everyone, we hope you can make it to our museum soon. So please visit if you can, and go out and visit your local museums too. And go out and see some live music while you're at it.
Oh, it's coming back, Andy. And thank you, Andy. It was really a pleasure talking with you. I always say this, but I mean, a good interviewer will get the interviewee to talk, and I talk quite a lot now. Marty said something very funny. He says, "Yeah, you always tell you never stray from the story after you've told it 40 times." I love that, because I do. I talk a lot now. I'm the guy that was in the back line of the Byrds that didn't speak.
Right.
In the book where Lennon says, "Does this one speak?" It was,
right.
And which didn't bother me. I thought it was pretty funny. Of course, I turned beet red when he said that. But anyway, it was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Same
so
here. It was a true honor, and you made my job easy. But thank you for saying that as well.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks a lot.
Well, have a good evening.
Yeah, and I'll see you soon. I hope to be in Cleveland soon. I hope so.
I expect to see you. I would love to do that. Yes, thank you.
And then we'll sing Sin City together. Correct? Okay.
It's a date.
I got you in the interview. Thanks, buddy. See ya.
Have a good evening. Take care, everyone. Bye.